You'll get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey guys, give me attention. Sit down. I'm going to start just a minute or two early so I can be sure and get you out on time. We got some guests tonight, and I don't want to give them the wrong impression. I got a little bit more than I have sometimes, and I'll try to keep it in the short 3 hours that y'all have allotted for me to use. But if you got the email, I told you I was going to talk about messed up. But what I really want to make you understand is how the Bible works, and the more I look at it, the more I read it and study it, and the more I listen to other people that are smarter than me, this Bible's got lessons in it that we can use today. And they're really day-to-day, just plain old facts if we'll just look at them and use them. But I'm going to talk about David mostly. Usually when I talk about messed up, I talk about Peter because he's kind of my favorite. But tonight I'm going to go in the Old Testament, talk about David. But I really want you to see what the Bible does for us with a path to follow daily. There is an old acronym that I read one time. The Bible is spelled Bible, and that stands for Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth. I think that's pretty silly, but I think that's pretty good. The story I'm going to talk about tonight is about David and Bathsheba. You read it a lot. I think we've all heard it. We probably know the story, but there's more to the story when you really dive into it. It just opens my eyes more and more and more of how big a mess David made with that. But I'll start with 2 Samuel chapter 11. Verse 1 says, in the spring of the year when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab. I wonder why David didn't go to battle. That was my first question. Why did David not go? He was a mighty king, great warrior. He had killed bears and lions with a sling and a pocket full of rocks. He killed Goliath, the big giant. He was a good warrior, but he didn't go to battle. And the question in my mind, why? I think he had an ulterior motive to stay home. A lot of what I talk about tonight could sound like prosecutorial. It's a big word for a redneck, but since we've got the great prosecutor Kamala Harris running, I thought I'd throw that out there. Heard her say that the other day. I just see if y'all were listening. Verse 2, David says, David rose from his bed and walked to the roof of his house. Another question, why? Why would you get out of bed and walk to the roof of your house? In his defense, and that ain't being a good prosecutor, but Proverbs 25:24 says, it is better to dwell on the corner of the rooftop than in the house with a contentious woman. He had several wives. He might have had a contentious woman on him that night. So that might be why he went to the rooftop. I think he went to the rooftop to see what he could see, and I think he knew what he was going to see when he got there. He saw a lady, next door neighbor, named Bathsheba, that was bathing in the open. The next point I want to make is he asked a servant, who is the lady? And it's like he didn't know her. She lived next door. Obviously, if you can see her from the rooftop, she's got to be somewhere in the vicinity of your house. But he acted like he didn't know her. The way the servant answered him kind of gives you some doubt. He said, is it not Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Like, you know who that is. It's Bathsheba. Uriah is one of your 30 mighty men, and this is his wife.
Well, in his defense, he's always looking at her face. He's looking at other things that time.
Probably the case, Glenn. Glad you brought that up. Glenn.
Oh, I should have known that.
Yeah, should have known that. But there was actually 37 of David's 30 mighty men, and Uriah was one of them, and he was her husband. I think he knew the lady. Another point I want to make is her father was Eliam. He was another one of David's 37 mighty men. His father, which would have been her grandfather, was Ahithophel, who was David's chief counsel. He advised David for years. He had kept him from being killed by Saul on occasions For 30 years, they were together. They were talking. I think if you know the grandfather, the father, and the husband, there's a good chance you know the lady. You don't have to ask, who was that girl? I think he actually saw her growing up. He probably knew her from a little girl. This beginning to sound prosecutorial. Building a case. Verse 4 said, he sent messengers and took her, and she lay with him because she was cleansed of her impurity. That's another key point. This sounds like he went and picked her up first night, everything good, one night stand. But if she was cleansed from her impurity, that was her monthly cycle. There were strict laws or customs in the day of how a lady had to cleanse herself from her impurities. On the last day, she would take that bath that he saw her taking, and then for 7 days, she would have to visit the temple to pray, and on the 7th day, she would offer a sacrifice of 2 turtle doves. I don't think the partridge in the pear tree had come out yet, but the 2 turtle doves had to be sacrificed. So can you imagine for 7 days, David's counting down. He can't go into this woman that he wants to lie with for 7 days. And as the days go by, he's ticking off and he's thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And on that next to the last day, I expect he's calling that, you got them turtle doves? What time does the priest get there tomorrow? I want you, one of those doorbuster things. You be there ready. But bottom line is, God gave David 7 days to do the right thing. He could have thought this thing through and said, that's wrong, and that's a married woman, and I'm not going to do that. David didn't. He was the king. Verse 5 says, so the woman conceived. She told him, I am with child. Another point that I'd make that this wasn't a one-night stand. It would have been probably 30 days before she would have known she was pregnant. They didn't have pregnancy tests back then. It would have been that amount of time. I say they may have slept together the whole time. Her husband was still at war, battling. He was not home, so there's a good chance this was not a one-night stand. Verse 6, well, I'll tell you first, David realized now he's messed up. He's got a baby on the way. He can't hide. Everybody's going to find out about the affair. So he's trying to find a way to cover his problems. Verse 6 says he sent for Uriah, her husband. Verse 7 says he questioned him about the battle. He did this to cover his reasoning for sending for him. There was no reason for Uriah to come. He had Joab was the general. If he wanted to know what's going on in the war, he would have sent for Joab. He had Uriah come so he could cover his butt, hoping he'll sleep with his wife, and then the baby might be his. Uriah, verse 9 says, Uriah slept at the door of the king's house. He did not go down to his house. Verse 10 says, King David questioned him, did you not go down to your house? Did you not come from a journey? Verse 11 says, Uriah said, the ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my lord Joab and his servants are encamped in open fields. Shall I go into my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Now David realizes he's dealing with a man of great integrity, great character. This is not an average guy. I mean, if you give a fellow that's been at battle 30 days, 60 days away from his wife, and he comes home, pretty good chance he's going to want to go sleep with his wife. This guy was a strong man of character. So David tries plan B. He's always got another way out. Verse 12 says, David says, wait here today and tomorrow, then I will let you depart. Verse 13 says, now when David called him, he ate and drank before him, and he became drunk. David's going to take the man of great character and try to make him drunk so he'll do something against his better knowledge. Still trying to make his plan work. It still didn't work. He still slept at the foot of the king's house. He did not go home to his wife. So now we got plan C. David's mess is getting bigger by the minute. Plan C says, verse 15, David sent a letter by Uriah to Joab, said to place Uriah in the hottest battle and retreat from him. Basically, Uriah delivered his own death sentence to the captain of the army. He handed it to him, knowing he wouldn't read it because he was a man of great character. He knew he would follow the rules from the king. So his mess was getting bigger and bigger, and now he was making a really big mess because he had had Uriah murdered. As best I can tell, David had broken 5 of the 10 commandments here in just a few days. Shall not lie, he lied. Shall not covet his neighbor's wife. Shall not commit adultery, which he did. Shall not kill. And also honor your father and mother. His father was a great, honorable man. It was Jesse. And we know that from reading how David was picked as king. So 5 of the 10 commandments he broke in just a few days there. Verse 27 says, when Uriah's wife had completed her mourning, which was customarily 30 days, King David called for her, and she became his wife, and she bore him a son. But this thing that David had done displeased the Lord. But I want you to understand, the Lord didn't convict David. He didn't sentence David. He sent a messenger, which was a prophet, Nathan, to David with a story. This was like an Old Testament parable. Nathan shared the story with David. He said, 2 men in a city, one a very rich man, one a very poor man. The rich man had many flocks of sheep. The poor man had only one little ewe lamb that he had raised from birth. Goes into great detail about how they grew up together. The lamb had eaten from his table and drank from his own cup. They were pretty close. They were tight. Traveler came to town to visit the rich man, and he refused to take from his own flock, which was many. Instead, he took the only one lamb from the poor man and prepared it for the traveler. When David heard the story, he became very angry. Verse 5, chapter 12 says, his anger was greatly aroused, which would be understandable, I'd say. He said, the man that has done this should surely die, and he shall restore 4-fold for the lamb he took. Quite often, the Bible says you restore 7-fold. In this case, it was 4-fold. I think that was another important note in there. Nathan told David that he was the man in the story. Now, there's parts in the Bible that says vengeance is mine. I think in this case, David made his own sentence for himself. If you read on through there, David and Bathsheba lost this baby. The baby was sick and it died. Later, David lost 3 other sons. They were murdered. David's 4 kids were died. The lamb was restored 4-fold. So in his own words, he sentenced himself, not the Lord. So I don't think the Lord put the vengeance on David. I think David's conscious, and all that worked out by his own words. So when I look at these stories and why they're in the Bible, this has got to be kind of an embarrassing story for God, because David was one of his chosen. The Bible says David was a man after God's own heart, one of his chosen people. And to go and do this and make the mess bigger and bigger and bigger and finally end up with murder, it's like I would be a little bit embarrassed if something happened with some of my kids like that. I wouldn't want it in the paper. I wouldn't want it on the news, which would be a day or two. The Bible is here forever, and we can read this story 3,000 years later. It's like, why would God put that in the Bible? I think God puts that in the Bible so we'll understand. We all gonna mess up. Everybody in this room, I'm gonna say, has messed up. But last month we talked about fair and equal. I want to talk a little bit about God's grace, and we'll close with that. But God's grace is fair and equal to everybody that receives Him. I think a lot about our church, what we're going through, what we've been through. I was born in this church, seen a lot of stuff happen. Our pastor's been 40-some years, I don't know, but prior to that, he was the youth pastor. He grew up in church just like I did. I think about my son Alex, Brother Charles over here. You look at a preacher and you say, well, you don't work but 30 minutes a week, 45 if you count Wednesday night, and it's nothing to it. There's a lot of work. I can tell you from putting this lesson once a month together, I'm not smart as they are, but it takes me a lot of time to put something together that I think is interesting to talk about. These guys work hard to put this together. Visit the sick, listen to people with counseling. It's a big deal. But the same amount of grace that God put on David, because later he and Bathsheba had another son who became the king. His name was Solomon. So he didn't strip David of the throne. He forgave him, blessed him with his grace and mercy, even though he had committed all those sins. The same grace and mercy is poured out on Brother Wesley, Brother Charles, Alex, and these other pastors. There's more pastors in the room, I'm sorry, I didn't mention. But I think about Brother Randy. Brother Randy plays the keyboard for us. And Brother Randy can take them 3 fingers on that right hand and make a keyboard say things that keyboards don't normally say. Yeah. He is good with the keyboard, and what he does ain't wrote on that piece of paper where he's reading. He's good at it, but he had a health scare a few years back. Didn't think he'd be back. Didn't think he'd get out of the hospital. Certainly didn't think he'd be here playing the keyboard for us. Same grace and mercy blessed David and Wesley and Brother Charles, blessed Mr. Randy to be with us. And it takes effort. It takes effort for the preachers. It takes effort for Mr. Randy. He could have quit and understandably said, I understand. He's just not where he can come back. It takes effort to do that. I stand behind him. I'm lucky enough to get to watch him and hear him. Same effort that I try to play 2 services every Sunday, but the same blessing Mr. Randy gets, I get. You guys, the same blessing I get, you get. If you make a mistake, all you got to do is turn back to God. We try to fix it ourselves, we make a bigger mess. There's a story in the Bible I just shared with you to show that. It's easy to follow. But I just want you to understand, no matter how bad you've done, no matter where you've been, you can't make a mess big enough that God's grace can't cover you, and it's free. It don't cost nothing. All you got to do is accept it. I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming. Got a lot of new guys. Some I've invited for years came tonight. Mr. Dwayne, I was trying to get you out of here before dark so you get back to the backhoe, but I think it rained enough. You're out for till tomorrow at least. Yeah. But I thank all of you for coming. You've been here every night or every month for 8 or 10 years. Well, if it's your first time, we do it again next month, the last Monday night. Put it on your calendar, try to come.